to the Movement Professional Podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Lapp. So today we're going to go over best practices for hydration. We've talked about hydration in a couple other podcasts and how it fits with some of the best practices for other important systems in health, such as lymphatic health, as well as metabolism. So I figured it would be useful to do a more thorough investigation into the best practices to optimize our hydration and just talk a little bit deeper about why and how hydration is so important in our lives. So first of all, the importance of hydration broadly is that it maintains bodily functions such as digestion, circulation, temperature regulation. So if we're not well hydrated, all of those important functions in the body, they're just not optimized. They're not working as well. And if we're really dehydrated, they could lead to death if we take hydration to its or dehydration to its fullest extent. So it's absolutely vital to just keep us alive that we're hydrated. But more for the purpose of this discussion, it would be looking at mild dehydration and how many of us will experience mild dehydration daily and how that could just limit our performance and our overall health in the long run. Another important factor of hydration is that it supports physical performance and cognitive function. So something that we may not see or may go under the radar a little bit more is that we're not as optimally hydrated as we can be. Our physical performance and our cognitive function will decline, and it might not be an obvious decline, like we're not able to actually do our job or exercise or perform in a sport, but we just are a little worse off than we otherwise would be. We have some sense of sluggishness, some sense of inability to focus, and we might not link that to hydration, but hydration could be a nice place to start if we want to improve some of those things. So some of these dehydration-related health issues are kidney problems. So dehydration can lead to kidney stones or acute kidney injury. Urinary tract infections, pretty common if you're not well hydrated, as insufficient hydration reduces urine output, and that helps to flush out bacteria typically. We can also have the opposite, where sometimes we get urinary tract infections and it'll lead to more urination, or sometimes if we're hyperhydrated, we may be urinating too frequently, but dehydration generally leads to less urine output, and therefore we're not able to get as much of the bad stuff out of us, if you will. So we don't want to be afraid of peeing. We'll talk about urination a little bit more when it ties into dehydration, because a lot of times that is one of the holdups when one thinks about functionally trying to increase hydration, that it actually becomes quite inconvenient because you find that you're urinating more. So we can talk about how to minimize that or optimize that, and also just how to think about that so that it doesn't have to be as sinister. Electrolyte imbalance is another problem with being dehydrated, and it could lead to imbalances in such as sodium and potassium, which are crucial for muscle function, nerve signaling, overall cellular function. And a lot of times, again, this stuff tends to manifest not as a emergency, but more as something that slowly over time leads to decreased performance, decreased cognitive function, and then eventually it could lead to things like cardiovascular issues, digestive issues, things like constipation, acid reflux, indigestion. As I alluded to before, cognitive impairment is another dehydration-related health issue. We can have impaired concentration, impaired attention, memory. Could affect performance at work, at school. We might find that we're more irritable, we're more anxious, we have more mood swings. And a lot of times these are sort of the normal ebb and flow of life, but we might not realize how much hydration plays a role in our different moods throughout the course of our lives. And again, physical performance decline, we might see decreases in strength, endurance, overall physical performance. And then there's also an increased risk of injury. And if you're in pain already, there tends to be an increased sensitivity to pain when hydration is an issue. I think it can oftentimes go under the radar for how important it is for many of the things we care about. Some other things that we might care about are like skin issues, dry skin, worsening of existing skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis related to hydration, heat-related illnesses, which are more sinister if we're not well hydrated or we dehydrated for too long, can lead to heat exhaustion or heat stroke. That's a more severe situation that typically is related to sweating profusively and not being able to replenish the water that we're losing from perspiration with proper hydration. Cardiovascular issues such as increased heart rate, lower blood pressure can be related to dehydration, and then just general fatigue and lethargy, which will be connected to some of the things we talked about earlier, such as cognitive impairment, mood swings, physical performance decline, and all that can be linked to dehydration. Some of the research on hydration and performance, to just give some evidence to what I just talked about, there's a review published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition that indicates that athletes who lose as little as 1 to 2% of their body mass through sweat exhibit increased heart rate, increased core temperature, increased use of muscle glycogen, along with decreased cardiac output, cognitive awareness, anaerobic power, and time to exhaustion. So all of these things would substantially get in the way of an athlete's performance. And outside of athletics, it's likely going to make us more likely to get fatigued earlier in the course of our lives. When studying individual hydration plans, Ayotte and Corcoran found that tailoring fluid and sodium intake based on an athlete's specific fluid and sodium losses demonstrated improved anaerobic power, attention, awareness, and heart rate recovery time. So being dehydrated leads to many issues of performance, and then having an individual hydration plan helps. So that's basically what that research says. The type of fluid that we find and we use matters. So research published in the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition suggests that deep ocean mineral water may positively affect hydration recovery after dehydrating exercise and could be beneficial for muscle strength and recovery. However, further research is needed to confirm these findings. So, on the topic of what type of fluid to use, we'll talk a little bit more about electrolytes and things like that. But this gives us some preliminary evidence that some mineral water might be better than, tap water or something like that. But I think we want to start with just getting the fluid in, and then as you're doing that more often, then you can start to see if you notice improvement if you change the type of fluid. It's a study in the British Journal of Nutrition found that dehydration can lead to disruptions in mood and cognitive functioning, which may impact physical performance. So some general guidelines to improve our hydration would be to look for somewhere between 8 to 10 cups of water daily. That's about 64 to 80 ounces, so a little bit more than a half gallon. And that's going to be something to look at as far as how do we improve our hydration. One, we have to have a baseline of what we're already doing, and then get a sense of how much is a half gallon, how much is a gallon of water, and how far off are you from that. Other fluids matter too, so it's not just water. We want to think about how much we're consuming from water, but also think about how much we might be consuming from caffeine style beverages, along with how much we are consuming from water-based foods such as fruits and vegetables. So all of that really matters. And I think sometimes what you see is, I've experienced this myself, is when you really try to increase your water intake and you forget about all the other fluids you're consuming, that's where the frequency of urination really skyrockets, and you might be getting more fluid than is necessary, or some things can be tweaked within nutrition, and this is probably more common, that could improve the sense of hydration without having to guzzle down water throughout the course of the day. So I think it is useful to have a nice practice for consuming a lot of water for a variety of different reasons. But if you feel like you're already doing that and you still don't feel hydrated, that's where you start to look at some hydrating foods within your nutrition that can really, really make a big difference, and also just change some things behaviorally when we think about snacking or think about what we might be munching on, instead of thinking about it always from a perspective of what's satiating or what might be even giving us the most micronutrients or macronutrients. We can look at it as what foods can we use that can actually help us hydrate and not feel like we need to guzzle down as much water. It's helpful to think about reducing the intake of water before bed if we want to optimize sleep, because if we are trying to get all of our water in right before bed, then likely we're going to be up a couple times peeing. So it could be a useful guideline to try to front load some of the water intake that we have early in the morning and then gradually drink as the day goes on to get the rest of our goal. And individual needs will vary based on our age, our sex, weight, activity level, and climate. So, activity level and climate specifically, that's going to lead to different levels of perspiration. So, how much we sweat really matters. I give a link in the slideshow presentation for a hydration calculator through Camelback, which is a company that creates these hydration bladders and other things for hikers. And what's interesting about it is it actually will take into account your gender, your height, your weight, your age, but then it'll ask you questions such as, what color is your urine? How much do you typically sweat? Then it'll ask you the activity that you're going to do. So in this case, it says hiking. I'm going to hike for, and then I'll ask you how long. So let's just put 2 hours and 30 minutes, the intensity medium. Next, the weather is going to be sunny, or is it going to be cloudy? You pick one, give a temperature, we'll say 80 degrees, and then it gives you a ideal hydration amount. So in this case, it would be about 2.3 liters, one liter per hour. So that's just one example, and I can't tell you how reliable that is, but it could be a good starting point when you start thinking about sweating, that there are some of these calculators out there that can help you think about. It's not going to be just your typical guidelines. If you're sweating a lot more, if you're in a climate where it's really, really hot, you're going to have to add more. So generally, you can look at it as about 16 to 24 ounces of water per every pound lost during exercise. So you can get really diligent with that and actually weigh yourself before and after exercise and be pretty specific with your calculations of how much more fluid you have to add back in. So that's a good starting point of thinking about 16 to 24 more ounces of water every pound that you've lost during an exercise bout. Some signs of dehydration to look for are obviously thirst and dry mouth. But sometimes that could be, if you're only looking for that, that could be unreliable. So urine, I think, is a really good one to be aware of. Clear, light yellow indicates well hydrated. If it's clear, sometimes that can indicate overhydration too. So if you're always peeing clear and you're peeing a lot, there's some things to look at there that we could talk about for not having to urinate as frequently when you're consuming more fluids. If it's straw yellow, that usually is a sign of good hydration. When it starts to get into a darker yellow or an amber, you're looking at mild dehydration. Honey or brown, you're looking at dehydration, potential medical emergency. And orange could be dehydration, but it could also be side effects of medicine. So being aware of what medicine you're taking and some of the side effects that might occur there, change in color of your urine could be part of that. So you might be decently well hydrated, but just getting different color of your urine, it could be part of the medicine. So you just want to know that if that's a common side effect. And then, as we alluded to earlier, so fatigue, dizziness, and confusion to varying degrees. So it's a spectrum. It doesn't have to be you're totally disoriented, but if you're mildly dehydrated, you're going to be possibly more fatigued than you otherwise would be. You might be a little bit dizzy and not realize why. And so it's drink some water, maybe get some electrolytes in your system. It's a good place to start because a lot of times you'll feel way better just getting some hydration. Best sources of hydration, water is usually the best option. In my experience, I think it's better to put your efforts into, at least initially, just getting the quantity in, increasing your quantity, and then focusing on quality later. But along with that, you can look at some other sources of fluid that give you hydrating benefits, but then also will have some minerals or micronutrients in them that actually will really enhance how you feel throughout the course of the day. When I am consuming a lot of water, I tend to pee a lot. So it can help to minimize that or improve that just from a functionality standpoint. So I don't feel like I run to the bathroom as much, but I do feel like immediately as I'm eating those fruits and vegetables that have a higher water content, that I'm getting a bump in energy that I'm not going to get from just consuming more and more plain water. Broths can also be something that if the red soup broth gives you some calories, it gives you some positive ingredients, minerals, and micronutrients, but also can be hydrating. And then you want to be careful with sugary drinks and excessive caffeine and alcohol. Alcohol is well known for being something that dehydrates you, but it also just limits your function in so many ways. But caffeine is one of those things that I think it's a little bit sneakier because it actually does help in many ways your productivity throughout the course of the day. But a lot of the times, the coffee or tea you might be having is made with water, so you're getting some fluid in there too. But it really is a diuretic. So if you have too much of it, that's going to be that thing that makes you keep peeing, and it might send some of those nutrients that you're trying to hold on to, the electrolytes you're trying to hold on to, out of you. So if you're getting a lot of water in, but you're also consuming a lot of caffeine, even if that caffeine isn't high in sugar, it could be just purely tea, purely coffee. That could be a reason that you're voiding so much. And that could, one, make the practicality of hydrating more uncomfortable, more inconvenient, but also it could be getting some of the electrolytes out of you in a way that isn't healthy. So, specifically, we talked about high water foods. And just to give you some specific numbers here, vegetables to look at as your best options are cucumbers. They have a 95% water content. Celery, lettuce, radishes all have a 95% water content. Bell peppers, 92% water content. For fruits, tomatoes, 95% water content. Watermelon, 92% water content. Strawberries, 91%. Honeydew, 90%. And peaches, 89%. And other foods, soups and broths, clear broths, about 90 to 95% water content. And silken tofu, good option, 80 to 90% of water content. Some dehydrating foods and drinks to look at. We already talked about some sugary foods, alcohol. Alcohol specifically inhibits the production of antidiuretic hormone, which leads to increased urine output and potential dehydration. Certain high protein foods. So high protein diets can increase the need for water as the body requires more fluid to process protein, which can contribute to dehydration if not balanced with sufficient fluid intake. Salty foods that can lead to an increased thirst, water retention, which can ultimately contribute to dehydration. Talked about caffeinated beverages. Excessive caffeine has a diuretic effect. So it just increases urine output. And again, that combined with trying to actually hydrate with more fluid intake, you're voiding too much, and then that could be a problem over time. Some spicy foods may have an increased effect on sweating, which can lead to more fluid loss. So I don't know that that's going to be too common of an issue unless you're constantly eating spicy foods. But if you do find you get a sweat from a certain spicy meal, just, usually feels good to hydrate after that anyway. But that would be something that you can look at a greater need for hydration in those moments. And then any food with low water content, such as dried foods, crackers, breads, it can really absorb water in the digestive process, which could be a potential for dehydration if not balanced with more fluid intake. So some practical solutions and considerations when we're trying to think about optimizing our hydration. Number one, get a baseline. Don't just try to make a change to your behavior without knowing where you're starting. And that's my suggestion for pretty much any behavioral change is know where you're starting, because you're going to want to make gradual change, not big changes over time. A lot of times, people try to make big changes. They try to follow these challenges like a 75 hard that tells you to do a gallon of water a day. And you've been doing like one glass of water a day, and you're going to be uncomfortable. And then you're going to think it's dangerous, which it might be if you do too much too soon. But it's unlikely to be dangerous, more so than it just is such a shock to your system that it feels overwhelming and it becomes problematic. And then you feel like you're hopeless in making any change to hydration. So that's like very common in what I see now in this world of seeing different challenges out there, or just getting a sense of, like, we hear what the optimal is, but we have no idea where we're starting, and we don't appreciate how much lower than these optimal guidelines we're starting from. So get a baseline first and then gradually add more. When you have decided what is appropriate to add, an appropriate goal to go after, get a bigger water bottle is my goal. Like, if you have to count 8 glasses of water throughout the course of the day, you're going to lose track, in my experience. So a big water bottle is a relative term here, but it depends on what your goal is. So if your goal is 64 ounces, get a 64-ounce water bottle, and you just got to finish one water bottle a day, and you're content. You might not want to do that early on. Get a 32-ounce bottle. Just drink one of those a day, and it's so much easier to keep track of your consumption throughout the course of the day. And you can drop an electrolyte tablet in that water bottle about once a day or every other day. And then you get some electrolytes with just drinking that one water bottle. But I've actually had to decrease water intake over time and try to get fluid from other sources. And knowing that I've already had my one big water bottle, that actually helps me limit kind of mindless drinking of water throughout the course of the day, and instead makes me think, okay, I want to get more water-based vegetables in, water-based fruits in. Maybe I get some teas in, or be very aware that I've already consumed one big water bottle throughout the course of the day that I'm in. I may have to be careful not to consume a lot more fluid, a lot more caffeine. So it just helps me have a baseline that keeps moving and keeps changing throughout the course of the day. So once you develop a baseline for where you're starting, you also want to have some awareness as you have hydration practices, what you're doing day in and day out. And I just think that that one big water bottle really helps you understand where you are. If you have two of those water bottles, if you wanted to increase your intake, that's not a hard thing to do math on. And then like, all right, I'm going to go for a gallon of water. I'm just going to drink two of these. But if you have smaller water bottles, it's really going to be hard to keep track of that over time. You could certainly do it. And if you're someone who's diligent with that, then do it however you want. But that's been an experience for me that I think is quite useful. And with clients that, things get overwhelming when you start to try to keep track of water, because you're typically not thinking about it when you're drinking it. You're sipping it throughout the course of the day. You're grabbing a water bottle here and there. But that one big water bottle really can, at least at first, give you some structure into how much you're consuming. And then I have on the slideshow here kind of a joke, but drink while driving. And that means if you're trying to get more fluid in, use your commute to and from work to be a time that you consume a lot of water in that big water bottle. And if you were going to have, say, two of your big water bottles a day, if you wanted to get a half gallon, but you had a 32-ounce bottle, then you can do on the way to work, you drink pretty close to a 32-ounce bottle. And then on the way home, maybe 32-ounce bottle. I do recommend that you get a little bit fluid heavy in the mornings so that you're not close to bed. So depending on what time you're driving home at night, maybe you don't want to chug 32 ounces of water, but get in the habit of drinking while driving. That's a good time to consume a lot of fluid. And again, just depends on, I guess, how long your drive is, if you're going to have to pee, but there's an opportunity there where you don't have to be doing a lot of other things, where have a water bottle with you. That's a good time to get more hydration in. Snack on high water vegetables and fruits too, but it really depends on what your goals are for caloric intake, for sugar and things like that. I'm a fan of high water fruits myself, but you can't go wrong with high water vegetables. They are low in calories. They're very hydrating. They give you some extra nutrients. Instead of using electrolyte tablets, you can think about having a nice versatile palette of snacks of high water vegetables, because you'll get most of what you need from electrolytes just doing that and adding some fruits into that mix. Also helps you appreciate like how you might want to prepare some of these foods. That I don't think there's any problem with cooking your fruits and cooking your vegetables from time to time, but it's very obvious when you have fruits and vegetables raw that you could tolerate raw versus when they're cooked, that you lose some of the water content. So if you are thinking about the value of some of these fruits and vegetables for a water content, it becomes more obvious that I'm going to find the ones that are easiest to consume raw, because that's where I'm going to get the most hydration effect. And then a lot of times what comes up with that is more energy and also more satiation, that you don't feel like you want the lower water foods as much, or you don't want to consume some of the stuff that you're typically trying not to consume as much. So it becomes useful from many angles. And I think it's, once you get in the habit of snacking on these high water vegetables, you actually look forward to it, because you get a combination of a good enough taste. And as you do it more, you actually learn to like the taste more and more. But you also get this quick feedback of increased hydration, less dry mouth, and typically more energy and often more concentration. The other thing I'll say is don't be afraid to pee, especially when you are making initial change to hydration. You're going to pee more. And sometimes that peeing more is good. It's clearing out the system. We've talked about being careful with caffeine and some other things that might make you pee too much. And if that's happening, then you actually may have to balance out your sources of hydration from, food sources with water, with electrolyte tablets and things like that, so that you're basically getting more directly what you're looking for without having to consume quite as much fluid overall. But the electrolytes ultimately is what you're looking for to hold on to the fluid in your body a little bit better and get it where you want it to go, get it to the tissues you want it to. So not having to consume as much fluid to get that value is a good thing. But oftentimes we have very little reference for how much we actually need to optimize that. So if you feel like you are just peeing excessively, electrolyte tablets work really well, or foods that have a lot of electrolytes in them, which tend to be fruits and vegetables that are also hydrating because they have a high water content, tend to be your best bet. So get more of those in and maybe do one big bottle of water instead of two. So hopefully that was useful. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm on movementprofessional.com. That's my website. On Facebook, facebook.com, Movement Professional. Instagram at Movement Prof. And I just started a longevity-based training subscription service, movementprofessional.com/sign up. And that's just based on my first book of longevity-based training, 3 major categories of exercise: squat exercises, grip strength exercises, get up style exercises. Those 3 together, trying to go from beginner to advanced, and you'll basically get everything you need. Helps you prioritize your training for life. I'll see you next time.